G'day everybody and welcome back to another episode of Craft by Tim. I am going to do a project that I've wanted to do for a pretty long time, and that is make myself another lighter. Except this time, we're going to be making it out of Damascus. So this is what I have to work with. It's not very much. It's actually a very small amount of Damascus, and I'm not entirely sure what this pattern actually looks like. It's been a while since I've actually done anything with it. I am going to throw it in the lathe and I'm going to see whether or not it turns kind of concentrically, and then we're going to go from there. This is what we currently have. Basically we have a 12.7mm shaft. I'm going to turn that down to about 11 to 12mm so I can have a really nice fine wind guard, but more on that later. Currently it's about 52mm long. I'm going to stretch that out to about 60mm long. What we have is a 4.2mm hole bored 45mm deep, and that is going to meet up at the end with a 2.5mm hole big enough to hold our wick. In the very end we have a 7mm hole bored about 6mm deep and tapped out with an M8, so that's for our plug. And that's pretty much all of the end components. We're going to stick this back in the lathe, take it down to a consistent thickness, then we're going to part off any excess that we don't need right now. Then we're going to do something that I've never done before, and that is try and use an end mill to bore a square bottom hole. This is all new territory for me, but I think this is how you would do something like that. I don't know how well this is going to work, but I'm going to give it a shot, see what happens. Alright, we've made some pretty good progress. As you would have seen, I've marked up this tiny little square. So you can see that tiny little square. I've marked that up so that I can now cut that out. I've also got a center line marked, and that is where I'm going to basically grind so I have a nice groove for the flint tube to sit in. I'm going to cut out this square for the striker wheel, and then I'm going to drill a couple extra holes in the wind guard to make sure that the fire can breathe adequately. we've got the flint tube turned down to a diameter that I'm happy with, but I have a major problem, which is that. A bit of delamination there could pose some serious issues. I'm going to slide this further back into the chuck, hopefully be able to grab it with just the end rather than grabbing it on this knobby bit on the end. And then we're going to start drilling it out. I'm going to have an M3 tap on the very end and then a 2.5mm hole all the way through. Okay, couldn't grab it from the back end, so we're just going to do it from the front end. We feed it all the way through, 2.5mm, hopefully no issues. Oh yes! Finally. I'll tell you what though, I got really good at sharpening 2.5mm drill bits. See if it's centered on the other end. Yeah, it's pretty close. So I'm going with the idea of TIG welding this. I don't know whether or not this is the best option. It seems like the best option because the other option is to either silver solder it or braze it, and I don't know how those options are going to hold up against the thermal shock of being quenched, because we're still going to harden this after it's done. Even though it's just a lighter, Damascus has a tendency to pop a little bit more when it is hardened, and I don't know how silver solder or brazing is going to be affected by hardening it. First side came up pretty good, second side's not so good, but it's workable. Alright, it's finally done. Very happy with the finished product. There are a couple things that I'm not super happy about, which is, first of all, the hole in the back of the flint tube is slightly off-centered. I could probably fix that with order of operations. Because the head of the flint tube is extra bulky because of the flint wheel holder, I could have easily fixed this by making it all the same size, drilling the hole from both ends, and then going back through and taking it down to its final thickness, and that would have solved that issue. The second issue is the welding. One side turns out alright, second side not so much. Perhaps I should have gone with a different method. Perhaps there's a way that I could have cleaned it up using a Dremel tool and maybe just grinding it out a bit. I don't really know, but at this point in time I don't want to mess it up more by trying to fix it. I was really hoping that I would have been able to pull off those welds, but having two convex surfaces meeting like this makes for a really difficult fusion weld. Not saying that it can't be done, it's just that I wasn't able to do it on this try. So the test piece that I did actually came up pretty nice, and then I flunked it on the actual weld, which is a shame, but long story short, I finally got to beat Alec Steele to a project, and that is something worth treasuring. So thank you everybody so much for watching this episode, and I'll catch you all on the next one. In the meantime, do remember to stay safe, happy crafting, and as always, cheers.